Welcome to This Explainer. We're diving straight into a massive, landmark study out of Oxford University that asks, honestly, one of the most crucial questions of our time. Just how susceptible are our jobs to computerization? The researchers behind this, Carl Benedict Frey and Michael A. Osborne, didn't just guess at the answer. They actually built a totally novel methodology to analyze over 700 detailed occupations. Why? To figure out exactly what kinds of work algorithms and robots are coming for next. And you've got to see the sheer scale of their main finding here. A staggering 47% of total U.S. employment is currently sitting in the high-risk category for automation. Now, okay, this doesn't mean half the country is going to be out of a job tomorrow, right? But it does mean that nearly half of all jobs have tasks that could feasibly be automated by sophisticated tech over the next decade or two. I mean, we're talking about a massive portion of the labor market facing a fundamental transformation. So the obvious question you're probably asking is, what does this massive number actually mean for you? Is your job one of them? And if it is, what does the future of human labor even look like? To figure that out, we can't just look at what computers can do today. We need to look at historical patterns of technological disruption and, really importantly, the specific engineering bottlenecks that are still protecting certain human skills from being copied by a machine. So let's start by looking at the history of automation, going from deskilling all the way to AI. Automation isn't exactly a new fear. The researchers point out that way back in the 19th century, during the Industrial Revolution, technology was largely what economists call de-skilling. Basically, machines replaced highly skilled artisans with unskilled factory workers. But then the 20th century completely flipped the script. With electrification and these complex continuous flow production lines, factories and offices suddenly needed skilled, educated workers to run the machines and manage massive logistical chains. It sparked this huge race between education and technology, which actually led to the high school movement. But now we're in the 21st century and the timeline is shifting again. This new era is all about big data and artificial intelligence, and let me tell you, it's targeting entirely different types of skills. Next up, we need to talk about breaking the routine barrier, which is really the new frontier here. See, for a really long time, economists believed computers were strictly limited to routine tasks. We're talking manual and cognitive tasks that follow super explicit, well-defined rules. Think of a robotic arm on an assembly line or a basic spreadsheet calculator. But this new frontier? It has completely smashed that barrier. Thanks to the sheer volume of massive data sets, computers are conquering non-routine tasks. Seriously, just a decade ago, experts thought driving a car in heavy traffic or deciphering messy handwriting were way too complex to ever be automated because, well, you just couldn't write a simple rulebook for them. But today, thanks to pattern recognition, those tasks are absolutely becoming computerized. The researchers explain that the magic formula making all this happen is big data plus machine learning. Instead of programming a computer with explicit step-by-step rules, engineers are just feeding algorithms massive amounts of data. This allows the machine to find its own patterns and actually learn how to make unbiased decisions. And it's letting computers take over incredibly complex tasks. For example, the study highlights how IBM's Watson is being used by oncologists to diagnose cancer just by recognizing patterns across millions of medical records. They also mention law firms using language analysis software to scan through hundreds of thousands of legal briefs in a matter of days. The scope of what a computer can do is just rapidly expanding into cognitive domains that we honestly used to think were uniquely human. Which brings us to the 3 bottlenecks to automation. Basically, what computers still can't do. The study very conveniently categorizes the current limits of artificial intelligence into 3 distinct engineering bottlenecks. And here's the key. As long as these bottlenecks exist, human employment in these specific areas is protected. These bottlenecks are perception and manipulation, creative intelligence, and social intelligence. Let's look at exactly how the data maps these out across different occupations. Let's take that first bottleneck, perception and manipulation. If you look at the probability of computerization mapped against physical skills, it's pretty revealing. A telemarketer requires almost zero physical dexterity, unless I guess you count dialing a phone, which puts them at an incredibly high risk of automation. But then look at the surgeon, operating in a cramped, unstructured workspace, dealing with highly irregular objects, like, human organs. That requires a level of adaptability and immediate tactile feedback that robots just do not possess yet. So while factories are these perfectly structured environments made for robots, unstructured, unpredictable environments are a massive, massive bottleneck for automation. Moving on to the second bottleneck, creative intelligence. Here, you've got a court clerk's routine paperwork sitting in that highly automatable zone. But look at occupations like a fashion designer or a biologist. True creativity requires coming up with ideas that aren't just novel, but actually culturally or scientifically valuable. Sure, an algorithm can easily spit out a million random variations of a dress design, but it really struggles to understand human values enough to know which of those designs actually makes sense or evokes the right emotion. Stating our creative values clearly enough to literally encode them into a software program remains a monumental obstacle. And finally, we have social intelligence. A dishwasher doesn't really need to charm or persuade anyone to get the plates clean, right? They just need to scrub. But an event planner or a public relations specialist, they rely on incredibly complex human heuristics. They have to read a room, negotiate, show empathy, and actually persuade people to change their minds. The real-time recognition of natural human emotion and the ability to respond intelligently and organically in a social setting, that is something algorithms simply cannot replicate yet. So, where does this leave us? Let's look at the future of employment and this concept of truncated polarization. The stark reality uncovered by the researchers here is a strong negative correlation between an occupation's probability of automation and both its median wage and its required educational attainment. Notice how the trends go downward. Basically, the higher the probability of your job being computerized, the lower the average wage and education level of that job tends to be. The data makes it pretty clear. Generalist occupations that require high social intelligence, like management and business, and specialist roles requiring creative intelligence, like engineering and science, are by far the safest. So, the absolutely crucial takeaway from all this data is a major shift in labor market trends. Over the last few decades, computers mostly hollowed out middle-income routine jobs. Think clerical workers or factory operatives. But this new wave of machine learning and mobile robotics predicts something totally different. It predicts a truncation of labor market polarization. Because algorithms can now handle all these non-routine tasks, the data predicts that low-skill, low-wage service and manual jobs are going to be hit the absolute hardest. We're talking about massive shifts in transportation, logistics, administrative support, and tons of service occupations. Which brings us to the ultimate question I want you to consider as we wrap up this explainer. As we speed toward this incoming technological plateau, where algorithms are seamlessly handling routine, pattern recognition, and data-driven work, are you actively building the complex creative, social, and unstructured physical skills that machines still cannot replace? Because the future of employment won't be about competing with computers on their terms. It's going to be about doubling down on what makes us uniquely human. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive, and I challenge you to look at your own work this week and ask yourself, which side of the bottleneck am I on?